A failing musician snuck backstage to meet Kurt. The 5 words he said changed everything. November 17, 1993. The Seattle Center Coliseum. The air thick with cigarette smoke and teenage rebellion. Outside, rain hammered against concrete. Inside, 12,000 bodies pressed together, waiting for Nirvana to take the stage. Among them, hiding in a bathroom stall near the loading dock, was a 28-year-old man named Daniel Archer. His hands were shaking, not from excitement, from desperation. In his coat pocket, he carried a cassette tape, a goodbye letter to his wife, and exactly $17. What happened in the next 43 minutes would change everything. Daniel had no business being backstage. He wasn't press. He wasn't crew. 3 hours earlier, he'd been sitting in his rusted Civic in the parking lot, engine off to save gas, debating whether to drive the 4 hours back to Portland or end it all. The ticket in his glove compartment had cost him grocery money for the week. Sarah, his wife, didn't know he was here. She thought he was at his parents' house, looking for work. She didn't know they were 3 weeks from eviction. She didn't know the band he'd poured 8 years of his life into had officially disbanded 2 months ago. She didn't know that the demo tape he'd sent to 14 record labels had been rejected by all of them. The last one hadn't even opened the package. The bathroom stall smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat. Daniel could hear the opening band through the walls, the bass notes vibrating through his chest. He'd been a bass player once, a good one. People said he had something special, a feel for rhythm that couldn't be taught. His band, Scattered Light, had played every dive bar from Eugene to Vancouver. They'd opened for Soundgarden once, back in '89, before the world exploded, before grunge became a marketing term, before kids with trust funds started wearing flannel. But success never came. Not the kind that pays rent. Not the kind that keeps a marriage from crumbling under the weight of broken promises and empty bank accounts. His bandmates had moved on. Tommy got a job at his uncle's hardware store. Rick went back to school. Marcus just disappeared one day, left a note that said, "I can't do this anymore." Daniel understood. He was the last one clinging to the dream, and the dream was killing him. The cassette in his pocket contained 4 songs, his best work, songs he'd written at 3 a.m. while Sarah slept, trying not to wake her with his guitar. Songs about failure and losing yourself and wondering if you were ever meant for something more. He'd recorded them in Marcus's garage on a 4-track, mixing them on headphones he'd bought at a pawn shop. It wasn't professional, it wasn't polished, but it was honest. It was everything he had left. The plan was simple, born from the deranged clarity of a man with nothing to lose. Get backstage, find Kurt Cobain, hand him the tape, not for fame, not for a record deal, just so someone, anyone who understood what it meant to turn pain into sound, would hear it before Daniel gave up for good. Before he became another statistic, another Portland musician who couldn't make it work. Getting past security had been easier than expected. A side door, propped open by a stagehand, taking a smoke break. Daniel slipped through during a shift change, walking with purpose like he belonged there. The hallways backstage were a maze of cables and equipment cases. He heard voices, laughter, the distant thump of a sound check. His heart hammered against his ribs. At any moment, someone would grab his shoulder, demand credentials he didn't have, throw him out into the rain. The bathroom had become his hiding spot, his staging ground. Through the thin walls, he could hear the opening band finishing their set. Nirvana would be on soon. He'd have one chance. Maybe. The thought made him nauseous. Who was he kidding? Kurt Cobain didn't want to hear his pathetic demo. Kurt Cobain was a god to a generation. Daniel was nobody. A failing musician from Portland with $17 and a death wish. Before you judge Daniel's desperation, before you dismiss his plan as the fantasy of a broken man, you should know that this story is documented. Sarah Archer spoke about it in a 2003 interview with Alternative Press. The security guard who nearly stopped Daniel, a man named Robert Chen, confirmed the timeline in his own account. And Kurt's own journal entries from that month, released years after his death. Reference, a guy who reminded me why we do this. The events of that night have been verified by multiple sources, cross-referenced, confirmed. What you're about to hear isn't mythology, it's truth. Daniel checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. The headliner would start in 13 minutes. He stepped out of the stall, looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection showed a ghost, sunken eyes, 3 days of stubble, a Pixies t-shirt he'd owned since high school, worn so thin you could see through it. He looked like every burnout who'd ever convinced himself he was special, that music would save him, that talent was enough. The world was full of talented failures. The graveyards were packed with them. The hallway was chaos now, crew members rushing, equipment being moved, someone yelling about a microphone. Daniel moved through it like smoke, invisible in the disorder. He didn't know where he was going, just away from the bathroom, toward something. His hand gripped the cassette in his pocket so hard the plastic case cracked. Then he saw him, Kurt Cobain, standing alone in a doorway, smoking a cigarette, not surrounded by handlers, not protected by security, just standing there, looking as lost and tired as Daniel felt. He was thinner than he appeared in photographs, wearing a cardigan with cigarette burns on the sleeves. His hair hung in his face. He was staring at nothing or everything, or whatever ghosts haunted him. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body locked. This was it, the moment. Walk forward or turn around. Speak or stay silent. Risk humiliation or live forever, wondering, what if? His mouth went dry. The hallway seemed to stretch, physics bending under the weight of the decision. Somewhere in the distance, 12,000 people were chanting, waiting for their prophet, demanding salvation through distortion and raw emotion. Daniel's legs moved before his brain caught up. 3 steps. 4. Kurt looked up, made eye contact. No recognition, just the tired acknowledgement of another person existing in his space. Daniel's voice came out cracked, desperate. Hey, I know you're about to go on. I'm sorry. I have something. Kurt didn't speak, didn't smile, just looked at him with those blue eyes that had stared out from a million magazine covers, eyes that somehow contained both apathy and infinite sadness. Daniel pulled out the cassette. His hand was shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. I'm a musician. Was a musician. I don't know. My band broke up. I'm broke. My wife doesn't know I'm here. I spent our last money on this ticket. The words tumbled out like a confession. These are songs I wrote. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted someone who gets it to hear them before I quit, before I become just another guy who tried and failed. The silence stretched. 2 seconds. 5. An eternity. Kurt took a drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. Daniel braced for rejection, for security, for mockery. Instead, Kurt reached out and took the tape, turned it over in his hands. Reading the track list Daniel had written in Sharpie on the label, Scattered Light. Kurt read aloud. Your band? Yeah, was. Kurt nodded. A small movement. You drive up from Portland? How did you? Your shirt says Powell's Books. Only tourists and Portland people wear Powell's shirts. He smiled then, barely. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I'm from Aberdeen. I know all about small-town dreams dying in the rain. Someone called Kurt's name from down the hall. 5 minutes. He looked toward the voice, then back at Daniel. The moment was ending. Daniel felt it slipping away, a strange connection with a stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, who knew exactly what it felt like to pour your soul into sound and wonder if anyone was listening. Kurt pocketed the cassette. Then he said 5 words. 5. Don't let the sadness win. That was it. 5 words. Delivered without ceremony or profound emphasis. Just a quiet statement from one musician to another. From one person drowning in their own head to someone else fighting the same current. Then Kurt walked away, toward the stage, toward the lights and the screaming and the machine that would eventually consume him. Daniel stood there, stunned. The hallway spun. Someone pushed past him with a guitar case. The overhead lights buzzed. He realized he was crying, tears streaming down his face in this backstage purgatory, and he didn't know why. Relief, maybe. Recognition. The simple fact that someone had seen him, had heard him, had acknowledged that he existed in a world that felt designed to erase people like him. He made it to the crowd somehow, pushed into the mass of bodies just as Nirvana took the stage. The first chord of Smells Like Teen Spirit hit like a physical force. Kurt's voice, that raw, wounded howl, cut through everything. And Daniel, standing among thousands of people who thought this was just another concert, understood something fundamental. This pain, this desperation, this feeling of being crushed by a world that didn't care about your dreams. It was universal. It was human. And transforming it into music, into art, into anything that said, I was here, I mattered, I felt something, was the whole point. Don't let the sadness win. He drove back to Portland that night through rain that never seemed to stop. The Civic's heater didn't work, and he shivered the whole way. But for the first time in months, his hands were steady. Sarah was asleep when he got home. He sat in their tiny kitchen, drinking instant coffee, and wrote until the sun came. Not music, words, everything he'd felt, everything he'd seen, everything that had led him to that backstage hallway. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice came. They moved into Sarah's sister's basement. Daniel got a job at a record store, stocking shelves for minimum wage. It wasn't the dream, but he kept writing, kept playing, started posting his music online, back when the internet was still dial-up and hope. A song here, a recording there, building something small and honest, without expectation. The following April, Kurt Cobain died. Daniel heard the news on the radio at work, and he had to sit down in the back room among the cardboard boxes of unsold CDs. He cried for an hour, not just for Kurt, for everyone who'd ever been so tired that existence felt like punishment, for every musician who'd stood at the edge and wondered if it was worth continuing, for the version of himself that had been moments from giving up, saved by 5 words from a stranger. He kept the cassette tape he'd given Kurt. He still has it. Years later, in that alternative press interview, Sarah revealed that Daniel had made a copy the night before the concert, just in case. He'd never told her that. Never told her about planning to drive off the Aurora Bridge on the way home if Kurt had rejected him, laughed at him, ignored him. He'd only told her about the 5 words, "Don't let the sadness win." Daniel Archer never became famous. His music exists mostly in the corners of the internet, in Bandcamp pages and YouTube videos with a few thousand views. He teaches guitar to teenagers now, working out of a small studio in southeast Portland. He's 58 years old, still married to Sarah, still writing songs when insomnia hits. When students ask him about quitting, about whether their dreams are realistic, about whether talent is enough, he tells them the truth. It's not about fame or success or validation from an industry designed to chew you up. It's about not letting the sadness win. It's about transforming pain into something outside yourself, something that proves you were here. In 2019, one of Daniel's former students, a girl named Emma Chen, won a Grammy for a song she'd written about her struggles with depression. In her acceptance speech, she thanked Mr. Archer, who taught me that making music isn't about being the best, it's about being honest. The camera didn't cut to Daniel. He wasn't in the audience. He was at home in Portland, watching on a second-hand TV, crying for the 3rd time in his life. The first time was in that backstage hallway, when a dying god took time to acknowledge a nobody. The second was in a record store back room, mourning a man he'd met for 43 seconds. The third was watching his student accept an award he'd never win, realizing that influence doesn't require fame, that changing one person's life is changing the world, that 5 words, delivered at the right moment, can redirect the entire trajectory of a human existence. Kurt never listened to the tape. As far as anyone knows, was lost or thrown away or buried in the chaos of the final months before his death. It doesn't matter. The tape was never the point. The music was never the point. The point was a man at the edge of oblivion, finding a reason to step back, finding 5 words that rewrote his relationship with failure, with art, with the ruthless sadness that tries to convince us we're worthless. The world remembers Kurt Cobain for Nevermind, for changing music, for the tragic mythology of fame and destruction. But in one small corner of Portland, in a guitar studio above a coffee shop, his legacy is different. It's measured in the students Daniel teaches, in the songs they'll write, in the chain reaction of kindness spreading forward through time. It's measured in a life that was saved by the radical act of seeing another person's pain and saying, simply, I understand, keep going. So what about you? When was the last time someone saw you, really saw you? When was the last time you saw someone else? In a world designed to make us feel invisible, insignificant, disposable, recognition is revolutionary. 5 words, 43 seconds, one moment of connection. That's all it takes to save a life. That's all it took to prove that even in our darkest moments, when success feels impossible and dreams feel like lies we told ourselves, there's still a reason to keep going. Not for fame, not for validation, but because the sadness doesn't get to win. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear your voice, your story, your proof that survival is possible. Daniel Archer is still playing music, still teaching, still choosing to exist in a world that tried to erase him. Every day, in that studio above the coffee shop, he's honoring 5 words from a stranger who understood that sometimes saving someone is as simple as reminding them they're not alone. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone fighting their own battle. Someone standing at their own edge. Tell them what Kurt told Daniel. Tell them the sadness doesn't win.